Welcome back, and thank you for being here tonight. If you have just turned off the lights, if you have just pulled the blanket up, if you have just told yourself that this is the one you are going to fall asleep to, you are in the right place. Get comfortable. There is nothing you need to do for the next 2 hours except listen. You do not have to remember any of this. You do not even have to stay awake for it. The story will keep going whether you are with me at the end of it or not. And that is the whole point. Tonight we are going to walk through the entire story of Rick Sanchez. The whole arc. From a small boy in a garage in a town he never tells anyone the name of, all the way through the night, decades later, when he finally caught up with the man who had killed his wife and his daughter. We are going to walk through every quiet stretch of his life that the show has shown us. And most of the loud ones too. We are going to walk through the Citadel, the Federation, the Council, the Curve, the cloned daughter, the second Beth, the bird person wedding, the Szechuan sauce broadcast, the pickle, the spaghetti, the dragon, the heist crew, the toxic split, the memory parasites, the decoy families, the version of him that lived inside a video game for 40 years inside a 5-second blink, and the cold morning he finally walked away from the only fight he had ever been in. We are going to do all of that very slowly, in a low voice, with long pauses, because the point tonight is not to keep you awake. The point tonight is to give you a long, calm, well-told story to drift in and out of for the next 2 hours. Before we start the first chapter, do me one small favor. Tap the subscribe button at the bottom of the screen. This channel runs on long nights like this one, and every subscriber genuinely makes a difference to whether more of these get made. You can do it with your eyes closed. You do not have to come back to the screen, then settle back in. The story will be here when you do. We are going to begin, as all stories about Rick Sanchez eventually have to begin, in a garage. A small one, in a town in the American Midwest, in the middle of the 1960s, in the home of a boy who was about 7 years old, who had a soldering iron in one hand and a stolen vacuum tube in the other, and who already knew that he was smarter than every adult in the building. Chapter 1. The Boy in the Garage. The show has never told us the name of the town. It has shown us the house, very briefly in flashbacks. A modest single story in a row of modest single stories, with a chain link fence and a square of dry grass in the front, and a detached garage in the back. It has shown us the father, very briefly, in flashbacks. A tall, thin, dark-haired man with a mustache. A man who worked with his hands and did not say very much. A man who was already a little tired when his son was born. The show has never named him. The show has never named the mother either. There is a reason for both of those omissions, and we will get to it. What the show has told us, in pieces stitched together across 9 seasons of episodes, is that the boy who would become Rick Sanchez was not a normal child. He read at 3. He took apart the family radio at 4 and put it back together at 5, with one new feature that the manufacturer had not put in. He was building small machines in the garage by the time he was 7. By the time he was 9, he was building large ones. By the time he was 11, his father had stopped trying to keep up with what he was doing out there, and had started, instead, just bringing him sandwiches on a tray at lunchtime and leaving them on the workbench without comment. There is a single shot in one of the later seasons of a young Rick, in a flannel shirt, hunched over a workbench in this garage, with a lamp clipped to a shelf above him and a circuit board open in front of him, and the camera holds on it for a long beat. That shot is one of the only times the show ever lets you see this boy doing the thing he is doing, without irony, without a punchline, without a joke. He is just a kid in a garage building, something the world has never seen before, and he is happy. He is, possibly, the only time in the entire show you ever see Rick Sanchez happy without already being drunk. We know almost nothing about his school years. The show implies, but never says outright, that he was bullied. We know he had no real friends his own age. We know he spent most of his teenage years in the garage, working through textbooks he had not been assigned, building prototypes that nobody had asked for. We know that by the time he was 16, he was already corresponding with theoretical physicists at universities in 3 different countries using a false name, because they would not have taken letters from a teenager in a garage in the American Midwest seriously. We know he did not go to college. He has said this more than once across the run of the show, sometimes as a brag and sometimes as a regret. He has said that he taught himself everything he ever knew. He has said that the only useful thing he ever learned from another person was how to drink, and even that he refined on his own. He has said, in one of the quieter scenes of the entire show, sitting on a kitchen floor at 3 in the morning with a drink in his hand, that he had built his first portal gun prototype before he was 20 years old, and that nobody at the time understood what he was looking at when he tried to explain it to them. That last detail matters more than almost anything else in his early biography, and we are going to come back to it in the 3rd chapter, because the portal gun is the thing that broke his life open, and that, eventually, broke it apart. For now, what you need to know about the boy in the garage is this. He was already what he would always be. He was already too smart for the room he was in. He was already a little angry about it. He was already lonely in a way that he could not yet name. And he was already convinced, in the way that very intelligent and very isolated children sometimes are, that the rules other people lived by were rules he was going to be allowed to ignore, because of how clearly he could see past them. That conviction would, in time, become the engine that ran his entire adult life. It would also, in time, kill almost everyone he loved. But that is 40 years away from him still, in the garage, with the soldering iron and the vacuum tube. Tonight, the boy is just a boy. The light from the lamp falls on his hands. The radio on the shelf is tuned to a baseball game he is not listening to. The smell of solder and oil sits in the air the way it always sits in those small back-room garages in the American Midwest. The way it sits in 10,000 other garages, where 10,000 other quiet boys are doing nothing more interesting than rebuilding a carburetor. The boy in this one is not rebuilding a carburetor. He is doing the early math on something nobody else in the world has ever done. But he does not know that yet, so he just works. Chapter 2, Diane. The first time we see her in the entire show is in a fake memory inside Rick's head that he has paid a service to fabricate for him. And even in the fake one, she is in a garden, in the late afternoon light, holding a baby. The baby is Beth, the woman is Diane Sanchez. The garden is somewhere in the world Rick later, very specifically, destroyed. We do not know exactly when Rick met her. The show has been careful about this. We know it was after the boy in the garage had become a man in his early 20s. We know he had already invented enough small useful things to have some money, and we know he had already invented 1 or 2 enormous useful things that he had not yet told anybody about. We know Diane was not a scientist. We know she was kind. We know that she could make him laugh in a way that, even decades later, the memory of it would still make him cry if he was drunk enough to let it. The show has shown us her hair in flashbacks. It has shown us the back of her head as she stood at a kitchen counter, slicing fruit. It has shown us her hands, holding the baby. It has shown us her shoulder, pressed into Rick's chest in a hug. It has not, for most of the show's run, shown us her face. There is a long and deliberate reason for that, and the reason is that the show wanted the audience to feel about her exactly the way Rick feels about her, which is that she is everywhere in his life and nowhere in his life at the same time, that she is a whole shaped like a person, that she is the woman whose hair he can still describe but whose face he is sometimes afraid he is forgetting. What we know about her life with him is this: they were happy, they had a house, it was small, it had a garage, because of course it had a garage, and Rick worked in it the way his own father had let him work in his. Diane did not stop him. She did not ask him to come inside for dinner more than once. She brought him sandwiches on a tray and left them on the workbench, the way his own father had done, and she did this for years. When Beth was born, the work in the garage did not stop. The show has been careful about this too. Rick did not become a different man because he was now a father. Rick became a man who was still working in the garage all night, and who now also had a daughter, sleeping in a cot in a bedroom down the hall, and who sometimes brought the daughter into the garage with him in a small carrier strapped to his chest while he worked. There is a flashback in the later seasons of him doing exactly this. The baby is asleep against his chest. The soldering iron is in his hand. The radio is on. Diane is asleep in the bedroom down the hall. The clock on the workbench says 2 in the morning. He is humming. He never said it out loud in any of the flashbacks the show has given us, but you can tell, watching it, that this period of his life is the period he is, in the present day of the show, trying to drink himself back to every night. 3 or 4 years in a small house with a wife who loved him, and a baby who slept against his chest, and a workbench with a project on it. That is the entire happy stretch of Rick Sanchez's life. The entire show, every single episode of it, every adventure across every dimension, every battle with every federation, every duel with every other Rick, every horror at the bottom of every multiverse, is one man trying to find his way back to those 3 or 4 years, and failing because the man who killed them is still out there. We will get to that man in the next chapter. For now, you need to hold in your head a picture. A small house, a garage with a light on, a baby asleep against a chest, a wife asleep in a bedroom down the hall, a radio on low, a clock that says 2 in the morning, the smell of solder, the hum of a man who, for these few years, was not yet the loneliest person in any universe that contained him. He was just a man with a project on his workbench, and a family asleep in the rooms around him. That is the most important picture in the entire show. Hold it for a moment before we walk on. It is the picture that everything else is going to be measured against. Chapter 3. The Portal Gun. The portal gun did not begin as a portal gun. It began in the garage of the small house as a side project that Rick was running underneath 3 other side projects. He was, at the time, doing paid contract work for a defense contractor he never named, on the side of which he was also building a prototype hover engine, on the side of which he was also writing a paper he never intended to publish on the structure of dimensional barriers in the multiverse, on the side of which, almost as an afterthought, he was tinkering with the question of whether you could cut a hole through one of those barriers using a directed energy source. He was not the first scientist in the history of his world to ask that question. He was the first scientist in the history of his world to answer it. The breakthrough came, in the flashback the show has given us, on an ordinary Wednesday afternoon, in the garage of the small house, when Beth was about 3 years old. Diane was at the kitchen window. Beth was playing with a wooden train on the garage floor. Rick was at the workbench. He pulled a lever on a brass prototype, and a small green hole opened in the air about a foot in front of his face, and stayed open for about 4 seconds, and closed. He did not say anything for a moment. He looked at the spot in the air where the hole had been. He looked at Diane at the kitchen window. He looked at Beth on the garage floor. He looked back at the spot in the air. Then he pulled the lever again. A second small green hole opened in the air. He reached through it with his hand. He felt cold on the other side. He pulled his hand back. The hand was wet. There had been rain on the other side of that hole. There had not been rain in the town the small house was in for 2 weeks. That is the moment, sitting between his workbench and his daughter's wooden train, when Rick Sanchez became the most dangerous person in the history of his species. He did not know that yet. He thought he had built a clever toy. He thought, at most, that he had built something he could sell to the defense contractor for enough money to keep the small house and the wife and the daughter in the lifestyle he wanted them to have. He did not realize, in that first afternoon, that what he had actually built was a key, and that the door it opened was the door into every universe that had ever existed, and every universe that ever would, and that every other Rick in every other one of those universes was, at the exact same instant, in their own garages looking at their own small green holes in the air, and realizing exactly when he was realizing that they were all about to meet each other. It took him about 6 months to refine the device. It took him another year to make it portable, the way we see it in the present of the show, shaped like a small pistol, with a green vial of fluid set into the back of it. By the end of that year, by the time Beth was about 5, Rick was already stepping through holes in his garage wall on a regular basis, and coming back smelling like air that did not exist in the town he lived in. Diane noticed. Diane asked once where he was going at night. Rick told her the truth, in the way he would always tell people the truth, which was to say that he told her so much of the truth all at once that she had no choice but to write most of it off as a joke. He told her he was visiting other dimensions. He told her there were millions of him out there, all married to millions of her, raising millions of Beths. He told her he had been to a universe in which the sky was made of stone, and the ground was made of cloud, and a universe in which time ran backwards on Tuesdays, and a universe in which he had never been born, and another version of him had taken his place. Diane laughed. Diane went back to slicing fruit. That conversation, the one at the kitchen counter on a sunny afternoon in the small house, is the last fully happy scene the show has ever given us between the two of them. After that conversation, the trouble starts. because once Rick was visiting other dimensions, the other Ricks in those other dimensions started, without much noise about it, visiting him. They formed a council. They called it the Council of Ricks. It was the beginning of what would later become the Citadel. They wanted him to join. They wanted him to take a number, the way they had all taken numbers, and become part of the Federation of Variants. They wanted him to share his portal gun design, since most of them had built one independently. Chapter 4. The night the house burned. The show has shown us this night, once in full, in a flashback near the end of the 6th season. The episode is called Solarix. The scene is the longest single flashback in the history of the show. It lasts about 3 minutes. It is paced like a horror film. There is almost no music in it. Most of the audio is the sound of a kitchen at night. Rick was out. He has, in the show, never said where. We are left to assume the obvious, which is that he was out somewhere through the portal gun, in another universe, doing something that mattered to him enough to be away from his wife and daughter on the night they both died. He has also never said, in the show, what that something was. The show is careful about this. It wants you to feel the weight of what he was doing, but it does not want you to know what it was, because in the end, whatever it was, it does not matter. He was not in the house. That is all you need to know. He was not in the house. Diane was in the kitchen. Beth was at the kitchen table. The flashback shows us, very carefully, both of their faces. This is the first time, after 6 full seasons of the show, that you ever see Diane's face. Her hair is light brown. She has a small line between her eyebrows. She looks tired, but she is smiling at something her daughter has just said. Beth is about 6 years old. She is in pajamas. She has a glass of milk on the table. They are talking about a drawing Beth has made at school. It is a normal weeknight in a normal small house, in a normal town in a normal universe. A small green portal opens in the kitchen, about 4 feet off the floor, behind Diane. A man steps through it. The man looks exactly like Rick. He is wearing the same blue lab coat. He has the same blue hair, the same line at the corner of his mouth, the same posture. The only thing different about him, the very small thing the show wants you to notice, is his eyes. The man who came through the portal had eyes like a man who had already decided. He had a device in his hand. The device was not a gun. It was a small gray rectangle, about the size of a deck of cards, with one button on it. The show in later episodes calls it an Omega device. It works on a single target at a time. It collapses every version of that target across every universe at once, in such a way that not only does the person die, but every version of them across the entire multiverse dies at the same instant and stays dead. There is no other universe to escape to. No version of Diane survives anywhere. No version of Beth survives anywhere. The device makes them, in the same second, dead everywhere. He pressed the button on Diane first. She was facing away from him at the kitchen counter. She did not see it happen. She just stopped. Beth saw it happen. She was at the kitchen table with her glass of milk. She was 6. She had time to look up. She had time to see the man who looked like her father standing behind her dead mother, with a small gray rectangle in his hand. She had time, the show implies, to understand a little of what she was looking at. Then the man pressed the button on her too. The flashback holds, for a long second, on the empty kitchen. The glass of milk is still upright on the table. The drawing is still on the table. The man in the blue lab coat looks at the kitchen for a moment. Then he sets a small device on the kitchen counter, sets a timer on it, and steps back through his portal. The device on the counter, when it goes off, burns the kitchen. The kitchen sets fire to the rest of the house. The fire department arrives at about 11:30 at night. They find the house collapsed around itself. They do not find the bodies. The bodies, because of the Omega device, do not exist. The fire department, in their report, lists Diane and Beth Sanchez as presumed dead. Rick comes home around midnight. The show shows us this part too. He steps through his own portal into what used to be his garage and finds himself standing in the cold rubble of the house. The fire engines have just left. There is a neighbor at the edge of the lawn with a coat over their night clothes, looking at him. The kitchen is gone. So is the kitchen counter, and Diane and Beth. He stands in the rubble for a long time. The flashback holds on him. The show does not give him any dialogue. He does not scream. He does not cry. He just stands. He stands until the sun comes up. And then, when the sun is up, he goes back through his portal, and he begins. That is the entire setup for the rest of his life. That is the entire setup for the rest of the show. The man who killed Diane and Beth was another version of him. The man who killed Diane and Beth was, in fact, a Rick who had asked the question that the C-137 Rick in our story had refused to ask, which was the question of what it would feel like to be a Rick without the wife and the daughter. The Rick who killed Diane and Beth was a Rick who had decided that the wife and the daughter were the only thing slowing him down, and who, in his own universe, had killed them himself, and who had then decided, having done that, to go through the multiverse, killing every version of them that any other version of himself had ever loved. He was, in his way, the answer to a question Rick had been refusing to ask for 15 years. The Citadel called him Rick Prime. The reason they called him Prime was not because he was the first Rick. It was because, in the way they classified Ricks, he was the version of Rick who had pursued the original premise of the portal gun to its logical end without any of the sentimental drag of family. He was the prime number. He was the Rick the multiverse would have produced if no Rick had ever met any version of Diane. He had killed his own family. He had then, using the portal gun, found every other version of his family across every universe and killed each of them in turn. He had been doing it, by the time he reached the house in our story, for about 3 years. Diane and Beth in the small house in the small town in the American Midwest were not his first victims. They were the second to last. The very last was a Diane and a Beth in a universe with a green sky, who he killed about 6 hours after he killed ours. When he was done, every version of Diane and every version of Beth in every universe was dead, except for one. In one universe, there was a Rick who had been out of his garage that night. In that same universe, he had been a few seconds too slow with his Omega device, or distracted by a knock at the door, or called away by the council, or perhaps just doing something Prime had not factored into his calculations. And in that universe, a Beth survived. We will get to her in Chapter 6. First, we have to walk through the years in between, because they are the years that made Rick into the version of him you have spent the last decade laughing at on television. Chapter 5. The Long Hunt. Between the morning Rick stood in the rubble of his house, and the afternoon, 30 years later, when he sat down on a couch in a small suburban living room to meet a teenage grandson for the first time, there is a stretch of his life that the show has only shown us in fragments. The fragments do not, when you put them together, make a story so much as they make a portrait. The portrait is of a man who spent 3 decades looking for one other man and failing to find him, and who, in the failing, became someone else. He started, the show implies, the morning after the fire. He pulled the portal gun out of his lab coat. He stepped through the first hole he opened. He did not, for the first 6 months, sleep more than 3 hours at a stretch. He moved from universe to universe, hunting for any trace of a Rick whose Diane and Beth had also died on the same night his had. He found, almost immediately, that he was not alone. There were dozens of Ricks doing the same thing. There were eventually hundreds. They formed an informal network, the way men who have lost the same thing on the same night will form a network, and they shared notes, and they followed leads, and they assembled. Slowly, a picture of the man they were all looking for. The man they were all looking for was good. The man they were all looking for had planned the killings for years before he had done any of them. The man they were all looking for had built, in his own garage, in his own universe, not just an Omega device, but a way of covering his tracks across the multiverse. And the Ricks who were hunting him kept finding, at the end of every promising lead, a cold trail and a small gray rectangle left on a workbench like a calling card. Rick spent the first 3 years of the hunt sober. The show has shown us this in flashbacks. He was thinner. His hair had not yet gone the full shade of pale blue. His eyes were sharper. He did not drink. He did not eat much. He worked. He moved across the universes the way a hawk moves across a field. He was, the show implies, very close to catching Prime at the end of those 3 years. He was so close that Prime, in the 4th year, went into hiding so deep that the network of hunting Ricks lost the trail entirely. The trail went cold. The trail stayed cold for years. Rick kept hunting. The other Ricks, one by one, began to give up. Some of them joined the Citadel. Others retired into other universes and started new families with new versions of Diane. A handful drank themselves to death. By the time the trail was 20 years cold, Rick was the only hunter still hunting. That is when the drinking starts. The show is careful about this. The show wants you to understand that Rick Sanchez is not a man who has always been a drunk. Rick Sanchez is a man who became a drunk somewhere in the middle of his 4th decade of life, after he had spent 20 years failing to find the man who had killed his wife, and who had, somewhere in there, stopped being able to fall asleep without something in his hand. He invents things during those years. He invents portal fluid in a stable enough form to sell. He invents a small device that can store a memory the way a drive stores a file, and he sells a few of those too, on the side, in markets and universes where nobody knows his face. He works as a freelance scientist on 100 different worlds. He builds a small reputation in some of them. He builds a violent enemy or two in others. He picks fights with empires he could have walked around. He picks fights, the show eventually implies, because being in a fight is the only thing that makes the search for Prime feel less like searching for a needle in a haystack, and more like being a man with a job. He meets Bird Person somewhere in this middle stretch. The show has shown us this too, in flashbacks. Bird Person is a humanoid avian from a world that was being chewed up at the edges by the Galactic Federation. Rick was passing through. There was a war going on. Rick joined the war on the side of Bird Person's people, mostly because he hated the Federation on principle, and partly because he had nothing else going on that week. He fought in the war for several years. He was good at it. He was, by the time the war was over, the most wanted scientist on the Federation's list. And Bird Person was the only living being in any universe who knew the full details of his life before the fire. They became, for a time, the closest thing Rick had to a friend. He meets Squanchy in the same stretch. Squanchy was a small cat-like person from another world Rick passed through, who joined Rick and Bird Person's crew partway through the war, and who survived it. He meets Tammy in the same stretch, although he does not yet know what Tammy is, and we will get to that in a later chapter. He builds with Bird Person and Squanchy, a quiet underground that runs information against the Federation across a dozen worlds. He drinks through all of it. He sleeps in a hammock in a forest on Bird Person's planet for most of one summer. He almost stops looking for Prime during that summer. He does not, in the end, almost stop. He picks the search back up in the autumn and goes back at it. He searches for 30 more years. He never finds him. By the time he is in his 60s, by the time he has been hunting for 3 full decades, he has accepted, the way a man eventually accepts a thing like this, that the trail is gone, that Prime is gone, that there is no version of the universe in which Rick Sanchez is going to find the man who killed his wife and his daughter, because the man who killed his wife and his daughter is, by definition, the version of him who is best at not being found. He goes home, not to his own home. His own home is rubble in a town that has, by now, paved over the lot and built a small playground on it. He goes, instead, to the address of the closest version of his old life he can find. A house in a suburb, a daughter living in it who is in her early 30s, a husband she does not love, 2 grandchildren she has been raising without much help, a garage with nothing in it. He knocks on the door. The daughter opens it. The daughter has not seen her father since she was about 6 years old. The daughter looks at the man on her doorstep. The man on her doorstep looks at the daughter. The daughter, in spite of herself, lets him in. That is the first scene of the entire show. That is the pilot. That is the moment everything you have ever seen on television begins. Chapter 6. The Beth Who Survived. The Beth who opened the door was not the daughter who had died in the kitchen with the glass of milk. The Beth who opened the door was, in the multiverse classification the Citadel used, an entirely different Beth. A Beth from a universe in which Rick had walked out on his family when she was 6 years old instead of losing them. A Beth whose father had not been killed. A Beth whose father had instead abandoned her. This is the part of the show the 7th season finally let us see clearly, after years of implying it. The Beth that Rick is, in the present day of the show, the father of, is not biologically his daughter. Her actual father, the Rick of her own universe, left her on a doorstep when she was 6, and walked through a portal and never came back. He is presumed dead. He may in fact be dead. Or he may be hiding somewhere very far away, the way Prime is hiding somewhere very far away. The show keeps the door slightly open on this question, but for the purposes of the family in the suburban house, the answer is that he is gone. The Rick we follow, our Rick, the Rick from the universe where Diane and Beth burned in the kitchen, found this dimension during the long hunt. He found, in this dimension, a Beth who was in her early 30s, who had been abandoned by her father almost 30 years earlier, who was unhappily married to a man named Jerry Smith, and who had 2 children of her own, a teenage daughter named Summer, a 14-year-old son named Morty. He did the math, the way Rick Sanchez does math. He had in his original universe no wife and no daughter. There was, in this universe, a daughter who had grown up without a father. The same universe contained a grandson who looked, give or take a haircut, the way his own Beth might have looked if she had been born a boy. The same universe contained a garage, and the same universe contained an open spot in a family. He stepped into it. He told Beth he was her father. Beth, who had been waiting most of her adult life for a phone call from a father who had never made one, did not ask too many questions. She let him in, she gave him the garage, she gave him a bedroom. She did not, for the most part, look too closely at the dates on his memories, or at the small inconsistencies in his stories, or at the way he sometimes, when she came into the garage with a sandwich on a plate, looked at her for half a second as if he were trying to remember whether he had ever met her before. He picked Morty out of the family almost immediately. Morty was 14, and he was struggling at school. The show implies he was of below-average intelligence, in a way that was already starting to define his adolescence. He was also, the show implies very carefully across many seasons, the version of Beth's son whose brainwaves canceled out Rick's the most cleanly, which is a useful thing for a man on the run from an entire citadel of other versions of himself to have around. The Citadel can track Ricks by their brainwave signature. A Rick traveling with the right Morty becomes, in effect, invisible. There is, in the multiverse, a phrase the Citadel uses for the pairing. They call it a Rick-Morty cloak. Our Rick built his entire post-hunt life around being inside one. That is the part of the show people miss when they describe the relationship between Rick and Morty. The show wants you to think that Rick loves his grandson. The show, in many episodes, gives you reasons to believe that this is true. But the show is also, at the same time, telling you very clearly that Rick chose this particular Morty out of every Morty in every universe specifically because this Morty's brain made Rick harder to find. The love and the use are running on the same track. They are not separable. They never were. So Rick moved into the garage. Rick started taking Morty on what he called adventures, but what were, in practice, errands. He needed components for projects he was building. He needed access to chemistry he could not run on Earth. He needed allies on worlds the Federation had not reached. He needed, in some weeks, a witness. Morty was a 14-year-old boy who had never seen anything more interesting than the inside of his own bedroom, and who, when his grandfather opened a green hole in the air of the kitchen on a Saturday morning and told him to step through it, did what almost any 14-year-old boy in his position would do, which was that he stepped through. The first 2 seasons of the show are, in their entirety, the years immediately after Rick moves into the garage. They are the years of him relearning how to be in a family. They are the years of him deciding whether he can stand it. They are the years of him pretending, in front of his daughter, that he is the man she remembers, while privately knowing that he is not. They are also the years in which the Galactic Federation, which had been hunting him for the last 20 years of the long hunt, finally catches up to him, because there is only so long that a Rick can sit in a garage in a suburb in a single dimension before the universe finds him. We will get to that in a later chapter. First, we have to walk through the early adventures, because they are the only stretch of the show in which Rick is still, more or less, a happy man. He is back inside a small house. He is back inside a garage. He has a workbench again. He has, in his way, a wife again, in the form of a daughter he is allowed to call his daughter. He has a granddaughter who tolerates him. He has a son-in-law he can torment. He has a grandson who follows him through portals on Saturday mornings. It is not the small house in the town in the American Midwest. It is the closest he is ever going to get. For about 2 years, he lets himself live in it. Chapter 7. The garage in Suburbia. The garage Rick moved into when he came back from the long hunt was not the garage he had grown up in. It was a wider, shallower, attached one. It had a roller door that opened onto a concrete driveway. It had fluorescent strip lighting overhead. It had, in the back corner, a workbench that had previously been used by Jerry Smith for a brief and discouraging period of trying to refinish a chair. and which Jerry had abandoned about a year before his father-in-law showed up on the doorstep. Rick took over the workbench. He took over the back wall. He took over, within about a month, the entire garage, and the car that had previously parked in it was relegated to the driveway and never moved back inside. What he built in that garage over the first 2 seasons of the show would, if it were inventoried in the language of his own universe, be enough to violate about 60 interplanetary treaties. He built a portal gun stable enough to function as a daily commute device in case the Citadel managed to track the one he already had. He built a particle accelerator the size of a coffee maker. He built a spaceship out of, among other things, garbage from the recycling bin and a clock radio he found in the attic. He built, at one point, an entire pocket dimension to power the spaceship's batteries and put a small race of beings inside it, whose entire purpose for existence, without knowing it, was to make the spaceship's lights come on in the morning when he turned the key. The show plays this for a joke. It is, when you sit with it for a moment, the single most disturbing thing he ever does, and the show knows it. He took Morty on his first adventure on a Saturday morning in the first episode. The adventure was to a place called Dimension 35C, where they were going to collect seeds from a megatree. The trip involved nearly losing Morty's legs at the bottom of a cliff. The trip involved smuggling the seeds back through customs at the interdimensional border by hiding them inside Morty's body in a way that no 14-year-old should ever have to think about. The trip involved Morty being concussed badly enough that he was, for the next 3 weeks, partly unable to do basic algebra at school. Rick, on the ride home through the portal, ruffled Morty's hair and told him he had done good work. Morty, who had never been told he had done good work by an adult before, decided in that moment that he was going to keep going on these adventures, no matter what they cost him. The adventures kept going. There were dozens of them in the first season alone. One week they went to a planet of giant insects, and Morty fell in love with a daughter of a king. Another week they replaced everyone in the family with parasitic memory clones, and Rick had to shoot most of them. They were trapped, in one episode, on a planet where time was running backwards. In another, Rick designed a school dance for Summer to sabotage her ex-boyfriend's life. In another still, he turned himself into a pickle to avoid a family therapy appointment, although we will get to that one in a later chapter because it is more important than the show lets it look. Through all of it, Rick was, in his own way, learning to be a grandfather. He was not, by any reasonable measure, good at it. He was, however, present. He showed up at breakfast. He sat at the dinner table. He fought with Jerry. He gave Summer career advice that was, more often than not, actively harmful. He picked Morty up from school in his spaceship. He went on the adventures. He came home. He drank in the garage until 2 in the morning. He slept on a cot in the corner. He started over the next day. Beth, who had been waiting all her life for her father to come back, watched him do all of this with a kind of guarded hope. She did not ask him where he had been. She did not ask him why he had left. She did not ask him about her mother, although there is a flashback in the 3rd season in which she is shown, as a small child, standing on the doorstep of her old house in her own universe, with a suitcase next to her, watching the portal her father had just stepped through close in the air. That is the only memory she has of him. The Rick in the garage is a man who has not been present in her life for almost 30 years. She does not ask him to explain himself. She does not, the show implies, want to know. What she wants, the show very carefully shows us across the 2nd and 3rd seasons, is for him to stay. She wants the garage door to keep being open. She wants the workbench light to keep being on. She wants the smell of solder in the house. She wants, in the way a daughter who was abandoned at 6 wants, the noise of a father in the next room. Rick, for the first 2 years of his time in the suburban house, gave her that. He was there. He came home. He stayed. It would not last. The Federation was coming. The Citadel was coming. Bird Person was about to get married. And Rick, who had been in a kind of dormant decade, between the end of the long hunt and the beginning of the show, was about to be pulled back out into the noise of the multiverse he had built his entire adult life on top of. The garage years were the last quiet stretch of his life. He has, in the present of the show, never had another one as long. Chapter 8. The Council and the Citadel. To understand the Citadel of Ricks, you have to understand a thing about the multiverse that the show takes most of its first 3 seasons to slowly explain. There are not, in the multiverse of Rick and Morty, a few Ricks. Not a few hundred either. By the show's own internal math, the count is somewhere on the order of several 100 million Ricks alive at any given time. Every universe in which the boy in the garage made it to adulthood produces a Rick. Most of those universes do. The portal gun appears, in most of them, somewhere between the man's 25th and 35th year. By the time he is 60, in most of them he is using it. The first generation of Ricks who built portal guns figured out fairly quickly that they were not alone. They met each other, in the early years, almost by accident, the way two people walking through the same supermarket at the same time will eventually run into each other in the cereal aisle. They were horrified, at first the way anyone would be horrified, by finding out there was a version of themselves walking around the same kitchen at the same time. They got over it, the way the multiverse forces you to get over things. They started talking. They started sharing notes. They started, after some years of bickering, organizing themselves. The Council of Ricks was the first organization. It was a small body, made up of about a dozen Ricks, who had, between them, decided that the multiverse was going to need some kind of governance. If the Ricks were not going to start killing each other over patents and women, the council assigned each Rick a number based on the dimension they came from. Our Rick was assigned C-137. The number stuck. Everyone on the Citadel, even his enemies, even his friends, calls him C-137 to this day. The council started small, 12 Ricks in a room. Within 10 years, it had grown to 1,000. By the 20-year mark, 10,000. After 30, 1,000,000. By the time our Rick walked away from the hunt for Prime and moved into the garage in Beth's house, the council had become a full bureaucracy, with elected officials and committees and subcommittees and a small standing army, all of it staffed entirely by Ricks. They had built a physical home for the bureaucracy called the Citadel. In a pocket dimension nobody else had access to, the Citadel was the size of a small planet. It had millions of Ricks living on it. It also had, by an even larger margin, millions of Mortys. The Mortys are the part of the Citadel that gets less attention in fan discussions of the show, and they probably should not. The Mortys outnumbered the Ricks, something like 10 to 1. They were the labor force of the Citadel. They cooked the food, they ran the trains, they worked the factories that made the portal guns. They taught at the schools. The Ricks ran the Senate and the lab and the police. The Mortys ran everything else. The Ricks treated the Mortys, almost without exception, the way our Rick treated Morty. They were considered useful, expendable, brainwave-jamming companions, whose primary purpose was to make their Rick a little harder for the Federation to track. This is not a small detail. It is, in fact, the detail that the rest of the show is built on top of. The Citadel is a society in which several 100 million versions of one man have built an entire civilization that runs on the labor of several billion versions of his grandson. The Mortys, for most of the Citadel's history, did not have rights. They did not have votes. They had, in many cases, identification chips embedded in their skittish skin so they could be tracked if they ran away. The Citadel was, in its kindest reading, a benevolent dictatorship. In its less kind reading, it was the largest mass exploitation of one being by another in the history of any universe. The Mortys did eventually have leaders. One of them, in particular, will become the most important antagonist in the entire show, and we will get to him in a later chapter when we walk through the arc the fans call the Evil Morty story. For now, all you need to know is that there was, on the Citadel, a Morty who had been paying attention. There was a Morty who had noticed that the Ricks were not gods. There was a Morty who had decided, somewhere in his own childhood, that the entire arrangement was going to come apart, and that he was going to be the one to pull the pin. Our Rick, throughout his career, refused to join the Citadel. He refused to take a seat on the council. He refused when invited to live on the Citadel. He refused when offered to share the schematics of any of his inventions. He was, in the eyes of every other Rick in every other universe, an outlier. He was the only Rick of his generation who had stayed entirely outside the system. The other Ricks resented him for it. They also, the show implies, secretly admired him for it. He was, to them, the version of themselves that had not given in. He was the Rick who still had a garage in a suburb instead of an office in a tower. He was the Rick who still went home to a daughter at night. He was the Rick they all, in their own quiet ways, wished they had been. He hated them. He hated the bureaucracy. He hated the numbers on the jackets. He hated the Senate. He hated, most of all, the way the Citadel kept showing up in his garage at 3 in the morning with a warrant for his arrest for some violation of interdimensional patent law that he had, in fact, committed about 80 times. The first major plot of the show, in its first season, is about the Council of Ricks coming to arrest him. He breaks free. He takes their leadership down with him. He goes home to the garage. That fight is the opening chapter of a war that is, in one form or another, still going on at the present moment of the show. The Citadel has, at various points across the run, been destroyed and rebuilt. It has been infiltrated. It has been hijacked. It has been ruled by a Morty for a stretch. It has been blown up by Rick himself for sentimental reasons that he has never fully explained. The Citadel is, in the show, never really gone. It is the institutional version of every other version of him, every other choice he could have made, every other life he could have lived. He keeps blowing it up. It keeps coming back. Chapter 9. Bird Person, Squanchy, and the war that never ended. The Galactic Federation, in the world of Rick and Morty, is the closest thing the multiverse has to a stable empire. It controls a few thousand worlds. It runs them on a single currency. It has a military, a tax code, and a customs service. It is, in most respects, what you would expect a galactic civilization to look like if you had been reading about them in adult science fiction novels for the last 50 years. The Federation is not in itself evil. It is, in the show, presented as something more boring than evil, which is to say that it is presented as a large bureaucracy that, in pursuit of its own continuation, happens to do evil things on a regular basis without thinking about them much. Rick, in the middle stretch of his long hunt for Prime, ended up on the wrong side of the Federation almost by accident. He had been on a planet called Squarkion, drinking in a cantina, when the Federation came in to break up a meeting of resistance fighters who happened to be in the same building. Rick was not, at that point, a resistance fighter. He was just a man having a drink. The Federation, in the way of large bureaucracies, did not bother distinguishing between the men in the meeting and the men at the bar, and shot at everyone. Rick shot back. He killed 7 Federation officers in the time it took him to finish his drink and walk out of the building. The Federation after that had a file on him. The file grew. The man at the next table over from him during that fight was Bird Person. Bird Person in the show is a humanoid avian about 7 feet tall, with the head of an eagle and the body of a heavy-set man, and the dignified, soft-spoken bearing of an officer of a small army. He had been, before the Federation came in, the leader of the resistance meeting they were breaking up. He was, by the end of that afternoon, the new best friend of a 60-year-old drunken human scientist who had walked into the wrong cantina. The two of them got along almost immediately. Bird Person was a soldier. Rick was a soldier who had forgotten he was a soldier. They were, the show implies, very similar men under the surface, which is to say that they were both men who had loved one person very much, had lost that person, and had been looking for something to do with their hands ever since. They fought together for a decade. The war they fought was the war the Federation called the annexation of Squanchy's homeworld, and the rebels called the resistance. The show has shown us almost none of it directly. We have seen the aftermath. We have seen the buildings reduced to ash. We have seen the medals they did not bother to give themselves. We have seen, in flashbacks, the 3 of them sitting on a hillside at sunset with cigarettes and a bottle of something dark, the way men in war films sit on hillsides at sunset with cigarettes. Squanchy was the 3rd. He was small and cat-like, about the size of a child, with a vocabulary that consisted mostly of the word squanch, used as a verb, an adjective, a noun, and as a swear word, and he had, in his way, the most committed sense of loyalty of anyone in the crew. He would, in a much later episode, be the only one of them still alive and still loyal. And that fact would matter in a way none of the 3 of them could have predicted when they sat on the hillside with the cigarettes. The 4th was Tammy. Tammy was a young human woman who had, in the show's timeline, been on a school field trip to a Federation outpost when she had decided, on some impulse she has never fully explained, to defect from the school group and join the rebels. She joined Bird Person's crew. She fell in love with him. He fell in love with her. They were, by the end of the war, planning a wedding. The wedding is the next plot point in this story, and it is one of the most consequential things that happens in the entire show, so we are going to walk slowly through it. The wedding was held about 6 months into the second season of the show, on a forest planet that the survivors of the war had been hiding out on. Bird Person had invited Rick to be his bestest man. Rick brought the family. Beth, Jerry, Summer, and Morty all came through a portal to the wedding planet. They wore wedding clothes. They sat at a long table outside, under the trees, in the kind of warm afternoon sunlight that the show usually reserves for the scenes it is about to ruin. Tammy walked down the aisle in a white dress. Bird Person waited for her under an arch. The officiant began the ceremony. Halfway through her vows, Tammy looked up at Bird Person, smiled, and revealed that she was, and had been for the entire decade of the war, a deep cover agent of the Galactic Federation. She had been planted in the rebellion on her first field trip. She had been gathering intelligence on Bird Person and Squanchy and Rick for 10 years. She had, 2 weeks earlier, fed the Federation the location of the wedding. The Federation, even as she was saying her vows, was descending on the forest planet from orbit. She drew a small Federation-issued pistol from under her dress and shot Bird Person, point blank, through the chest, in front of everyone at the wedding. Bird Person fell, the forest filled with Federation troops. The wedding became, in the space of about 90 seconds, the most one-sided battle in the run of the show. Rick grabbed his family. He opened a portal. And then, in a moment, the show plays for a kind of grim joke. He left Bird Person bleeding in the grass under the arch, where he had been about to be married, because Rick had, in that moment, no time to pick him up. The family escaped through the portal. Squanchy, in the chaos, escaped on his own. Bird Person was, by every appearance, dead. The Federation took the wedding site and the forest planet within a few hours. Tammy, on a Federation transport above the planet, was promoted. The episode ends with Rick and the family hiding in another dimension, in a cabin with an icy lake outside, with the Federation having put a price on Rick's head that was so high every bounty hunter in the multiverse was, by the next morning, on his trail. Beth tells Rick they have to go home. Beth tells Rick they have to face this. Rick agrees. Rick walks outside in the snow, alone. He stands at the edge of the icy lake. He looks up at the sky. In the next scene, Rick is in a Federation interrogation room. He has turned himself in. He has surrendered. He has done it without telling the family. He has done it specifically so that the Federation will lift the bounty on the rest of them. He has done it because he is, at the end of every seasons of this show, the same man who came home and stood in the rubble of the small house at midnight. He is a man whose entire calculation about his own family is that he is the danger they need to be saved from. This is the end of the second season of the show. This is the moment Rick goes into Federation prison. This is the moment that, for the next year of the family's life, they think their grandfather is gone. This is also, importantly, the moment the Federation invades Earth. Chapter 10. The Federation takes Earth. We need to pause for a moment before we walk into the third season of the show and orient ourselves with a small piece of timeline. The Federation took Earth at the end of the second season. The third season opens with Earth under occupation. The opening episode of the third season, the one we are going to walk through in the next chapter, is the one in which Rick personally undoes the entire Federation occupation in the space of about 30 minutes of episode runtime, using nothing more than his own brain, a knife, and a chair he is strapped to. That episode is, by general consensus, the high point of the show. It is also the episode that gives us, in a single monologue near the end of it, the most direct account of his backstory we have ever been given by the show. Before we get to that though, settle back for a moment. You are about halfway through the video at this point, and this is the part of the night where I want to ask one small thing. If you have made it this far with me, and if you have not yet subscribed to the channel, this would be the kindest possible moment to do it. The channel runs on long nights like this one, on people who let a video play for 2 hours, on people who come back for the next one a week from now, and the one after that, and the one after that. The subscriber count is the only thing that lets us keep making them. You can tap the button without opening your eyes. You do not even need to come back to the screen. Just tap it once. Then let the sound carry you on into the second half. The rest of the story is, in many ways, darker than the half we have already walked through, and there are good reasons to stay near a familiar voice while we go through it. We are going to walk all the way to the end of the show, all the way to the kill, all the way to the morning after the kill. Together, so Settle in, the Federation has taken Earth, Rick is in prison, and we are about to walk through the most important monologue in the entire show. Chapter 11, The Rickshank Redemption. The episode is called The Rickshank Redemption. It aired in April of the year 2017, after a year-and-a-half long gap between seasons that nearly killed the show. The Federation, in the year of in-show time, since Rick had turned himself in at the cabin by the lake, had taken Earth. They had not, as you might expect, taken it by force. They had taken it by treaty. Jerry Smith, of all people, had been hired by the Federation as a low-level office worker. Beth had been retrained as a Federation veterinary surgeon. Summer had become a teenager with a chip in her arm. Morty had become a teenager working part-time at the Federation post office. The Federation had not destroyed anything. The Federation had simply absorbed the entire planet into its administrative system, and the planet, in the way of most planets, had let it happen. Rick, during this year, was in a Federation prison. The prison was a maximum security holding facility for political prisoners and rogue scientists. It was on a planet whose atmosphere was unbreathable to humans, which is part of the reason there had been no rescue attempt. He was kept in a private cell. He was fed 3 meals a day. He was, in the way of most maximum security prisoners, mostly left alone with his thoughts. The Federation, during this year, was trying to do one specific thing to him. They were trying to extract the schematics for the portal gun out of his brain. This is the central plot of the episode. The Federation, in the cold open of the episode, gives up on getting the schematics out of him through interrogation and decides to extract them directly by entering his memory using a piece of Federation technology called a Brainalyser. They strap him to a chair. They put a metal helmet on his head. They send a small team of Federation agents into a digital recreation of his own memories, and they begin walking through the rooms of his life, looking for the moment he invented the portal gun. The memory they are looking for is, in the episode, the most important memory Rick has ever had. They walk through his childhood. They walk through his college years that did not happen. They walk through his early adulthood. They walk through his time in the garage with Diane. And then they walk into a single memory, which the show has, by this point, been carefully building up to for 2.5 seasons. The memory is on a clear afternoon in the garage of the small house, with Diane standing in the doorway with a small girl in a yellow dress at her side, and Rick at the workbench with a half-finished portal gun in his hand. Diane is asking him to come out for a picnic in the park. The small girl is asking him to come on the picnic too. Rick is telling them he is too busy. He is telling them he has just had a breakthrough. He is telling them he is right on the edge of something he has been working on for years. Evil Morty, alone among the Mortys, alone among the Ricks, alone among any of the species of any of the universes inside the curve, had figured this out. He had spent 10 years building a device that could cut a hole in the curve and let a person escape into the actual full multiverse outside it, where versions of Rick Sanchez are not, in fact, the smartest man around, and where the centuries of Citadel rule have no bearing on anything. He had run president in order to gain access to the Citadel's central reactor, which was the only power source large enough to run his curve breaker. He had not done any of it out of malice. He had done all of it out of a single very specific motivation, which was the motivation of any prisoner anywhere, which was the motivation to leave. He uses the reactor, he cuts the curve, he steps through the hole. He vanishes into the rest of the multiverse, the parts that have never been visited by any version of Rick Sanchez, the parts where his name has never been spoken. The Citadel begins to collapse behind him, because the reactor he has used has destabilized it. Our Rick and our Morty escape just before the Citadel explodes. The Citadel of Ricks, the bureaucracy that took the better part of a century to build, is destroyed in about 3 minutes of screen time. The Ricks who lived on it die in the explosion. The Mortys who lived on it die alongside them. Our Rick and Morty go home to the garage. The 5th season ends with the camera holding on Rick at the workbench, drinking, the way it has held on him 100 times before, except that this time the look on his face is slightly different. He has, for the first time since the long hunt, lost something. He has lost the institutional version of himself. He has lost the place he could go. In his head, whenever he wanted to remind himself that he was different from the rest of the Ricks. The rest of the Ricks, as of this episode, are dead. He is, for the first time, the only Rick like him in the multiverse, with the single exception of the man who killed his wife and daughter, who is still out there, who is still hidden, and who has, somewhere in the noise of the curve breaking open, just had the door to his hiding place blown off its hinges. Chapter 15. Space Beth and the Clone Question. We have to go back for this chapter to the 4th season. There is an episode called The ABCs of Beth. In the episode, Beth, the daughter, the one in the suburban house, comes to her father with a question. She tells him she is unhappy with her life. She tells him she does not feel like the person she was supposed to become. She tells him that she has had, in the back of her mind, since she was a child, the suspicion that she could have been somebody more interesting if she had been allowed to be. She asks him for an option. He gives her one. He tells her about a piece of technology in his garage that he has been working on for years. The technology is a body cloning device. The device takes a sample of a person's DNA and grows, in about an hour, a perfect clone of that person. The clone is identical down to the memories. The clone, the moment it is finished, is the same person as the original, with the exact same biography and the exact same emotional life, and the exact same uncertainties about its life. The original, having produced the clone, is then free to leave its old life and go anywhere in the multiverse. The clone takes over the original life. The original is anywhere it wants to go. He offers Beth this. He offers to let her clone herself, leave her family, leave Earth, and go anywhere in the multiverse she wants to go, while a perfect copy of her stays behind in the suburban house and continues to be her family's mother and wife and daughter. The clone will not know it is a clone. The clone will continue in its head to be the original Beth with no memory of having made any choice. The original Beth will be free. The episode ends on a cliffhanger about whether Beth has taken the offer. The next time we see her, she is in the suburban house, making breakfast, being the mother she has always been. There is no way to tell, from anything in the scene, whether she is the original Beth or the clone of her. The show is careful about this. The show, in fact, refuses to tell you. The show has now been refusing to tell you for 5 seasons. There is, however, a second Beth. The second Beth, the one who is clearly not the suburban housewife, appears for the first time at the end of the 4th season. She is dressed in a Federation rebel uniform. She has scars on her face. She has, in the time since the cloning, become a freelance rebel leader fighting across the multiverse against various oppressive regimes. She is called by the show and by the fan community Space Beth. She has a ship, she has a crew, she has the same DNA, the same childhood, and the same memories as her domestic counterpart. The two Beths meet each other for the first time at the end of the 4th season finale. They embrace. They like each other. They go their separate ways, with the understanding that they are both real Beth and that neither of them is more entitled to the title of daughter than the other. The show is, with this arc, doing one very specific thing. It is taking the question that has driven the entire show, which is the question of which version of a person is the real one, and it is throwing it at the audience in the simplest possible form. There are two Beths. They are both Beth. Neither of them is more Beth than the other. There is no clone here, no original either. Just two Beths, both of them whole, both of them human, both of them their father's daughter. The show is saying, gently, that the question of which Beth is the clone is the wrong question. The right question is the question of why we would ever want there to be only one of any person. This will become important. The Beth question is, on the surface, a family episode. Underneath, it is the show's first direct attempt to answer the question of whether the version of you that survived a thing is more or less real than the version of you that did not. It is the question Rick has been refusing to ask himself, in one form or another, since the night he came home to the rubble of the small house. Was the Diane who burned the real Diane? Was the Beth who burned the real Beth? Is the new Beth, the one whose father walked through a portal when she was 6, somehow a lesser daughter than the daughter he lost? The show, through the Beth arc, is telling him, and telling the audience, that the answer is no. Every version is real. The Diane in any universe is Diane. The Beth in any universe is Beth. The Beth who burned was real. The Beth in the kitchen now is real. The Beth on the rebel ship is real. The question is not which one is more entitled to her own name. The question is what you do with the fact that there are, in the multiverse, as many of them as there are universes, and that the right answer to having lost one of them is, possibly, to walk to the next one and start over. He is not, the show implies, ready to hear that yet. He goes back to drinking in the garage. The question stays open. Chapter 16, Solarix. The 6th season of the show opens with an episode called Solarix. The premise of the episode is that the destruction of the Citadel at the end of the 5th season, combined with evil Morty's tampering with the Central Finite Curve, has triggered a kind of automatic reset across the multiverse. Every Rick is, without warning, pulled back to the dimension of his birth. The portal gun, in every version of it across the universes, has been backdoored by a clause that activates in the event of a curve breach. The clause sends each Rick home. Our Rick is, when the clause activates, in the suburban house. He goes through a portal in the garage and finds himself standing in the small town in the American Midwest, on the lawn of the small house. The house is, by this point in his life, more than 30 years gone. The lot has been built over twice. There is a playground on it. There are children playing on the playground. It is a sunny afternoon. He stands at the edge of the playground for a long time, looking at it. The episode walks us through what happens next. He goes to the house he grew up in. The house is still there. It has been sold many times since he last saw it. There is a family living in it. He stands at the curb and looks at it. He does not knock. He does not go in. He goes, instead, to the place where his old garage used to be, and finds that the garage, against all expectation, is still there. The house has been renovated around it, but the garage in the back has been left almost exactly as it was when he was a teenager. He goes inside. The workbench is still there. The shelves are still there. The fluorescent light is still working. He sits down on the workbench. He stays there for a long time. This is the part of the episode where the show, having shown us the long hunt, and the years on the run, and the suburban house, and the Citadel, and the Federation, finally lets him stop. He sits in the garage of the house he grew up in. In the universe his wife and his daughter died in, on a quiet afternoon, in the silence of a small town that has, in his absence, mostly forgotten he ever lived in it. He drinks. He looks at the wall. He looks at the workbench. He looks, in his pocket, at a small object he has been carrying for 30 years. The object is a vial of dried portal fluid. The fluid is from the night the kitchen burned. It was on his hand, in droplets, when he stepped through his portal back into the house and found the rubble. He has carried it, in his pocket, in one form or another for the entire run of the show. The fluid contains, in its molecular signature, the unique identifier of the portal gun that opened the door for Prime that night. Every portal gun ever built leaves a residue. Every residue is, in principle, traceable. The fluid in Rick's pocket has been for 30 years. His single piece of physical evidence linking the crime to the portal that committed it. He has, in those 30 years, never been able to trace it. The signature did not match any registered portal gun on the Citadel. It did not match any unregistered one either. It was a unique signature, a custom build, made by a Rick who had built his own portal gun without any of the standard components, specifically so that he could not be tracked. The curve breach has changed that. The breach has, in collapsing the Citadel's records and forcing every Rick home, briefly opened the entire portal traffic history of the entire Citadel to anyone who knows how to read it. Rick, in the garage of his old house, takes the vial out of his pocket. He looks at it. He uses a small device on his wrist to query the Citadel's broken records for the signature. The records come back. The signature, for the first time in 30 years, matches a destination. The destination is a dimension labeled J22. The dimension has been abandoned for decades. Nobody lives in it. There is nothing on the planet there except for a single small structure in the middle of an otherwise empty field. The structure is a house. The house belongs to a Rick. The Rick is Prime. Rick sits in his old garage for another long beat. He puts the vial back in his pocket. He stands up. He opens a portal. He steps through it. The episode ends with him standing in the field of J22, at the door of a small house, in the universe of a man he has been looking for since he was 34 years old. The door is closed. The lights in the house are off. The house from the outside looks like the small house in the town in the American Midwest. It looks in fact exactly like it. Prime, when he had built the house, had built it as a copy of the house he had killed every Diane in. He has been living in it, alone, for 30 years. Rick stands at the door. The credits roll. The episode ends. The next episode of the show is the Season 6 finale, Chapter 17, Rick Prime. The Season 6 finale is called Rictional Mortpoon's Rickmas Mortcation. On the surface, the episode is a holiday special. Inside the episode, in a B-plot that takes up about half the runtime, Rick walks into the house in J22 to find Prime. The show plays this confrontation completely straight. There is no music for most of it, no jokes either, and no Morty in the room, although Morty has come along for the trip and is waiting in a vehicle a few miles away. Prime, when our Rick walks into the house, is in the kitchen of the house. He is wearing a blue lab coat. He is older than the last time anyone saw him, although not by much. He has been, in the years since the killings, living a kind of quiet retirement. He has not been hunting anyone. He has not been building anything. He has been, the show implies, mostly waiting. He has been waiting for the day his old hunting partner from the multiverse, our Rick, would finally make it through the wall and come find him. He has been preparing for the conversation he is about to have for as long as our Rick has been preparing for it. The conversation, when it happens, is the longest single dialogue between two characters in the run of the show. It is also one of the most contained pieces of writing the show has ever produced. The two men, who are, in every other respect, identical, sit across a kitchen table from each other. Prime explains in a soft voice why he did what he did. He tells our Rick that the wife and the daughter were, in his analysis, a vulnerability. He tells our Rick that he had calculated, in his own universe, that any Rick who refused to give up the wife and the daughter would, in the long run, fail to reach his full intellectual potential, because the part of his brain that should have been working on physics would always be partly assigned to worrying about whether the wife and the daughter were safe. He tells our Rick that he had, in the long calculation of his own life, decided that the wife and the daughter were not worth the cognitive cost. He tells our Rick that he had killed his own wife and his own daughter first. He had done it on a Sunday afternoon in his own kitchen, in his own universe. He had used the same Omega device. He had then, the show implies, sat down in his own kitchen for a long time, with the bodies still there, and he had felt, instead of grief, the thing he had been hoping he would feel, which was clarity. He tells our Rick that the moment after the killings was the clearest moment of his life. He tells our Rick that the next 20 years, in which he had hunted down every other version of his wife and his daughter across the multiverse, had been an extended attempt to keep feeling that clarity, and that he had felt it every single time, and that he had, by the end of the hunt, achieved the thing he had set out to achieve, which was a kind of permanent stillness in his own head. He asks our Rick across the kitchen table whether our Rick has ever felt that. He asks him whether he has ever, in his long life of refusing to do the necessary thing, felt the kind of peace that comes with having done it. Our Rick says no. Prime smiles. He tells him that the offer is still open. He tells him that he can, even at this late date, kill the new Beth and the new Morty and the new Summer and the Jerry, and that the new family will be the last family our Rick has had to be afraid for, and that after they are gone our Rick will, for the first time in his life, be the man he was always supposed to be. Our Rick does not answer. The two of them sit at the table. Then, in a movement neither of them has telegraphed, both of them draw weapons at the same time. The fight is short. Prime is a Rick. Our Rick is a Rick. They are, in every measurable way, equally matched, except that our Rick has had 30 years of grief feeding the fight, and Prime has had 30 years of stillness blunting it. Our Rick wounds Prime. Prime in the fight wounds our Rick. They break apart. Prime, bleeding from a chest wound, opens a portal and escapes through it before our Rick can stop him. Our Rick is left in the kitchen, alone, bleeding. He goes home. He does not tell the family what has happened. He tells Morty, who has been waiting in the vehicle, only that the man got away. He tells nobody else. The season ends with him in the garage at 3 in the morning, drinking, with the wound bandaged, looking at the workbench. He is thinking. He has, for the first time in 30 years, made contact with the man who killed his family. He has wounded him. He has not killed him. And the man who killed his family is, somewhere in the multiverse outside the curve, in a place our Rick cannot easily follow, doing his own bandaging, and almost certainly preparing to come back. The credits roll, the season ends. The fans, by general consensus, agree that this is the moment the show stops being a comedy. Chapter 18, Unmortrican. The 7th season of the show opens with the family in the suburban house, in the period after the wounding. Our Rick is more withdrawn than he has been at any previous point in the show. He spends most of his time in the garage. He does not go on adventures with Morty for the first several episodes. He has, the show implies, gone back into the version of himself he was during the long hunt. The version that does not drink because it is having too much fun, but because it cannot sleep otherwise. He is, for most of the early part of the season, hunting Prime in a more organized way than he has ever hunted him before. He has, since the conversation in the kitchen, a fresh signature on Prime's portal gun. He has, since the destruction of the Citadel, free use of any portal frequency he wants. He has, since the wounding, a personal reason to find Prime before Prime finishes recovering. He is, by every measure, closer to catching Prime than he has been in 3 decades. He is also, by every measure, more tired than he has ever been. The episode in which the fight ends is the 5th episode of the 7th season. The episode is called Unmortrican. The episode runs about 22 minutes. The first 10 minutes are a kind of caper. Our Rick and Morty, working with Space Beth and her rebel crew, are tracking Prime across a half-dozen dimensions, picking up his trail, losing it, picking it up again. Prime in the runtime of the episode is moving fast. He is dressed for travel. He has not, in his retirement years, lost the skills that made him the most dangerous Rick in the multiverse. He is, for most of the runtime of the episode, slightly ahead of the team chasing him. He goes to ground in a dimension labeled K99. The dimension is empty. He has a safe house there. The team corners him in the safe house. The fight that follows is the largest single combat sequence in the show. It lasts about 5 minutes of screen time. It involves Morty, Space Beth, and our Rick all fighting Prime at the same time. Prime, for most of the fight, is winning. He is faster than any of them. He is, in his own corner, in his own safe house, prepared for an attack he has been preparing for 30 years. He kills Space Beth's second in command. He wounds Morty. He gets close enough to our Rick to put a knife in his side. And then, in the moment of the fight that the show has been moving toward since the first episode, our Rick gets a clean shot at Prime's head. He does not take the shot. He puts the gun down. He walks across the room. He grabs Prime by the collar. He looks Prime in the face. He does not say anything. The show holds on the two of them for a long beat. 2 old men in identical lab coats, in a dim safe house in an abandoned dimension. Then our Rick puts the pistol against Prime's head and pulls the trigger. Prime falls. The fight ends. The safe house is quiet. Morty on the floor is bleeding but alive. Space Beth, standing at the door, is breathing hard. Our Rick, with the gun still in his hand, is looking at the body of the man he has spent the entire arc of his life looking for. He does not feel anything. The show, in its honesty, gives us a long beat on his face after the kill. He does not feel joy. He does not feel peace. He does not feel the clarity Prime had told him he would feel. He feels, the show implies, almost nothing. The thing he has been carrying for 30 years is gone. The hole the thing was filling has not been filled by anything else. He is just an old man in a safe house with a pistol in his hand and a body at his feet. He goes home. Morty is patched up by Space Beth's crew. The family does not, for the most part, ever learn what happened in K99. Our Rick does not ever tell them. He puts the pistol in a drawer in the garage. He sits at the workbench. He has, for the first time in his entire adult life, no project to put on it. The rest of the 7th season is, in many ways, a long meditation on what to do with a man who has finished his life's work 20 years before the end of his life. The show does not, by the end of the season, have a complete answer. He goes on adventures. He drinks. He fights, occasionally, with Jerry. He sits in the kitchen at 3 in the morning, sometimes, with no project, with no hunt, with no council to outrun, with no Federation to outwit, with no Prime to chase. He sits with his hands on the table. He waits for the sun. Chapter 19. After the kill, it is worth pausing here, because we have walked through almost everything the show has so far given us in the way of canonical biography. We have walked from the boy in the garage to the wife in the kitchen, from the wife in the kitchen to the night in the rubble, from the night in the rubble to the long hunt, from the long hunt to the suburban house, from the suburban house to the Citadel, from the Citadel to the Federation prison, from the Federation prison back to the workbench, from the workbench through the years of adventures, from the years of adventures back to the empty kitchen in J22, and from the empty kitchen in J22 to the body of Prime on the floor of the safe house in K99. That is the entire spine of the show. Everything else is texture. Before we walk into the second half of the night, which is going to be the part of the video where we sit with the theories the fans have built up around the show. This is a good moment to ask one last small favor. If you have made it this far with me, all the way through the canon, all the way to the moment Rick finally pulled the trigger on the man who killed his wife and daughter, this would be the kindest moment of the whole video to tap subscribe. The channel is built on viewers like you, people who let a video like this play for 2 full hours, people who come back week after week for the long ones. The button is at the bottom of the screen. Tap it once and let the sound carry on. We are going to walk through the theories together in the same calm voice we have been using all night, and we are going to finish the video together. And then you are going to drift off, and the story will be here whenever you want to come back to it. So settle in for the second half. The Rick Sanchez who walks out of the safe house in K99 with the pistol in his hand is, in many ways, a different man from the one who has lived in the suburban house for the last 10 years. The hunt is over, the man who killed the family is dead, the work of 3 decades is done. He is now what he was always going to be, which is a man with no project on his workbench. The show, in the second half of the 7th season and into the 8th, gives him very little to do. He goes on smaller adventures, he drinks more in some episodes and less in others. He spends more time in the kitchen with Beth and Summer and less in the garage. He goes, in one quiet episode, on a long walk with Morty through a planet the two of them have visited before, and he does not say very much for the whole episode. He is, by the end of the 7th season, a man whose center of gravity has moved. The fight is no longer the thing he is for. The fight is no longer the thing he is against. The fight, in fact, no longer exists. There are, in the seasons, the hints that he is in his own to reckon with what he is now. After Wong off-screen, in not depict. He has and looked at the workbench anything. He has looked at the photograph of keeps in the small box under the back, and he has gone to with any of this. The show is telling you that he work of being alive, after finished, is its own kind of work he has. For the rest, that is, for now, where in the garage, he is by every measure, the worse. And he has, for man, nobody to use theories. We come now to this is the part where we sit, built up around the show, have eventually confirmed, have eventually denied, others have left in things, deliberately of these theories. We are them. They are the ones that, and they are the ones the small ways, given us. If at any point during you have done what the theories will keep going. If you wake up at the night, if you do not wake good night in the morning, again from the place you fell as people who watch these videos, the good night will be there. Theories. Theory 1. There is an episode in the second Morty night run. Rick takes Morty to which is the multiverse, at Blips and Chits, Morty, a life well lived, 3 immersion simulation, entire life of a man named Roy. In real time but only a few minutes, Morty plays Roy. He grows up in Roy's life, marries a woman in Roy's life, gets cancer in Roy's life. The whole simulation takes about 20 minutes. For simulation ends, Morty takes the headset off and lived an entire human life. Moment after he takes the headset, then he forgets and continues the rest of the fans have built around this The entire show is itself. Theory is that the real Rick's the one in the American Midwest, the kitchen burned. On the night he stood and did not go on to hunt for 30 years. On that night, went home house, and sat down, did the thing the show has implied he had thought. The theory is that from the long hunt through to the is a simulation. Rick is, somewhere, in playing a game called Sans Lived, in which the player's failing to find the man who, and then, at the very end, evidence for the theory is thin, places, suggestive. So is, by Rick's own convenient possible version of events to find a Beth who needs a Morty, whose brainwave he happens to find with an attached garage. Over the course of 3 decades, the right adventure for whatever that week, have noticed that the multiverse or giving Rick exists. This is the theory Roy-style game would do if you need to feel like you. Also the fact that the show has broken the 4th wall and characters are aware there is the running joke about Mr. X at the camera in a way. There is the scene in the 3rd in which Rick, in voiceover directly, there is the vat of acid having let Morty live what felt higher alternate life and refuses to apologize, left with the unsettling sense way doing the same thing. Have never confirmed the Roy, so never denied it. The question of whether the show is his head is a question on at least 2 occasions shrugged at. The shrug is, if the show is a simulation who could prove it, is the one playing the game has every root. Theory 2. There is a character in the show. He looks like a small human with light yellow skin. He is introduced in an episode Total Recall by a species of parasites false happy memories in them to multiply. The fan has learned that any character can only be remembered through in fact a parasite. They shoot many of them. Mr. Poopy Butthole, midway through the episode, is identified as a parasite. Beth shoots him. He goes down, he bleeds. The family, in the following beat, realizes that he has bled, which means he is not a parasite, because the parasites do not bleed. He is, in fact, a friend of the family, who has been part of their lives for years, and who has, in the chaos of the parasite hunt, just been shot by Beth for no reason. The episode ends with him in the hospital. He survives. He recurs throughout the show. He is, on the surface, a quiet recurring character, a family friend, a small yellow man with a button nose. The theory the fans have built around Mr. Poopy Butthole is the theory that he is, in fact, the most dangerous being in the show. The theory rests on a few pieces of evidence. He is, in the run of the show, the only recurring character besides Rick, whose memories of the family seem to predate the show itself. He is in old photographs. He is in old anecdotes. He is, when Beth has childhood memories, sometimes in those too. He has, by every appearance, been a part of the family for longer than the show has been on the air. Which would mean, in the math of the show, that he has been a part of the family from before our Rick moved into the garage. Which means, in turn, that he must have been a part of the abandoned Beth's life before she met our Rick. Which means he must have known the original Rick, the one who walked out on his daughter when she was 6. The theory says he is that Rick. The theory says that Mr. Poopy Butthole is in fact the Rick of this dimension. The theory says that the original Rick of Beth's universe did not in fact die. The theory says he turned himself into a small yellow humanoid with a button nose at some point in the years after he walked through the portal, possibly as a way of staying close to his daughter without her knowing it, possibly as a way of paying penance for the years he was gone, possibly as part of some longer plan we do not yet understand. There is, in the episode he is introduced in, a moment that the theory hangs much of its weight on. He is shot by Beth, but he survives. When the camera comes back to him at the end of the episode, he has, the show implies, no anger toward her for shooting him. He is in fact almost pleased that she has survived the parasite invasion. He looks at her, in a moment the show does not draw attention to, the way a father looks at a daughter. He has, in the seasons since, looked at her this way several times. The show has never explained it. The writers have not confirmed the theory. The writers have, in 1 or 2 interviews, said only that Mr. Poopy Butthole is important in ways that have not yet been revealed, which is the kind of phrase writers use when they do not want to confirm a theory in public, but do not want to deny it either. Theory 3, which Beth is the clone, we have already walked through, in Chapter 15, the episode in which Beth was given the option to clone herself. We have already walked through the fact that the show has, for the entire run since that episode, refused to tell the audience which Beth is the clone, the suburban one, or the space one. The theory we are going to sit with for a moment is the theory of which Beth, on the available evidence, is most likely to be the original. The most common version of the theory says that the suburban Beth is the clone. The theory says that the original Beth, the one who had grown up unhappy in the suburban house, was the one who actually took the offer. The theory says she walked out of the garage that night with a portal gun in her hand and went to find her own life in the rebellion, and that the Beth who came down to breakfast the next morning was the perfect copy of her, with no memory of having made the choice, who had then, over the years, grown into the rebel leader we know as Space Beth, while the suburban Beth had remained in the kitchen, slowly cooling, slowly becoming the colder woman the fans have noticed her becoming over the later seasons. The less common version of the theory says the opposite. The less common version says that the suburban Beth is the original. The less common version says that the woman who came to her father with the request for an option was the woman who, in the end, decided she could not leave her family. The less common version says she made a clone, sent the clone out into the multiverse, and stayed in the kitchen with her husband and her children, knowing that the version of her that had walked out the door was now somewhere out there living a life she had been too afraid to live herself. The less common version of the theory says that the slow coldness the suburban Beth has developed across the later seasons is, in fact, the coldness of a woman who has watched her own life happen to someone else, and who has, every time she sees Space Beth, had to swallow the fact that the woman in the rebel uniform is the version of herself she did not have the courage to be. Both versions of the theory have evidence in their favor. Both versions of the theory have at least one episode the show has aired that supports them. The show, as of the most recent season, has not committed to either version. The writers have, in interviews, said that the question is meant to be unanswerable. They have said that the point of the Beth arc is the point that no person is reducible to a single version of themselves, and that the question of which one is the clone is, in itself, a kind of error. The fans, in the way fans do, have refused to accept this and continue to argue. Theory 4. Rick is, and has always been, trying to die. There is a strain of fan reading of the show that says, in plain language, that Rick Sanchez is a man who has been trying to die for the entire run of the show. The theory says that the long hunt was a death wish in motion. The theory says that the years in the garage were a death wish disguised as a family life. The theory says that every adventure he takes Morty on is, on some level, a kind of suicide attempt that goes wrong by the standards of the attempter, which is to say that he keeps surviving. The evidence for the theory is, in places, very clear. In an episode in the 3rd season, Rick attempts to remove his own brain. 1 season later, he gets drunk enough that he openly admits to Morty that he is not sure why he keeps going. By the 5th season, in a fit of self-loathing, he deliberately seeks out a being that he believes will kill him, and is, in the way of his luck, disappointed when it does not. In the cold open of the Rickshank Redemption, Rick, in a Federation prison, is shown to have lost weight, lost color, and lost the ability to take much pleasure in being alive. The show, throughout its run, has shown us a man who is, on most days, somewhere on the line between alcohol use disorder and active suicidality, and who is alive at this point, at his age, more by accident than by intention.